Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Easter special edition of Coffee, Buses, and Politics. I'm Alex. With me, we have Stephen and David to comment on Cambridgeshire politics and take your questions. So, if you're watching this live, please do ask your questions in the comment sections, whether you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll be able to pick up some questions from you later on. But before we start taking your live questions, we did ask a few days ago if you guys had any suggestions of topics to discuss today. So first of all, a very happy Easter bank holiday, Easter weekend. If you're celebrating, happy Easter, and if you're just taking some time off as well, some well-deserved rest, at least on the Sunday, have a nice weekend with your friends and family. Uh, as you can see, we woke up at 7:30, or a bit before a.m., maybe 10 minutes before, to do this live stream for you.
Five
Uh,
minutes.
there's no day without politics. Even on Easter weekend, we can still debate Cambridgeshire politics and so on. So, do you have any message for the Easter weekend, David and Stephen, for our viewers?
I'm just recovering for a week of 2 weeks of politics where I've had meetings almost every day as well. So it's nice to have 4 days without meetings.
I have seen your Twitter thread on, well, your comment on councillor allowances, saying how many meetings you had. So,
Yeah,
well done.
yeah. I don't well. Wish everybody a happy Easter.
Yeah.
I'm yeah. Apart from a couple of work meetings, I'm actually having some time off because I'm a bit tired. So yeah.
Yes, I think everyone needs some time off. I'll try my best to have the Sunday off, although tomorrow it is canvassing in Peterborough. So, okay, I will start. We had a few suggestions from some people on. I will take the Twitter ones first, or X comments first. And the first one that really caught my attention, and then I went and actually read some of the research on this, is this new research that came out from Campaign for Better Transport, which is a national charity championing of fairer transport. You can check it out at CBT Transport on X or other social media, or bettertransport.org.uk, and see the research for yourself. One of the shocking figures in this research, which I knew Cambridgeshire was underfunded, but I didn't know it was so bad. And one of the findings was that the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority gets only £5.75 per head. So this is in central government funding for buses. So this £5.75 pence per head that we're getting in central government funding for buses is amongst the lowest in the UK. And five other transport authorities, so similar powers to the combined authority, get over 100 quid for per person. So this is really, really shocking, because when you speak about buses and how bad many of the public transport routes are in parts of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that is really shocking, thinking about that we get £5.75 per head in central government funding, and other transport authorities get over £100. So what's your response to that?
So the highest I think is Portsmouth, which does it get over 200? Portsmouth gets £235 per head in government funding, where we get five. The lowest is £4 a head in Swindon. So we're right down the bottom of that table.
David, what do you think about that?
I mean, and I think it's also it's a huge imbalance. It's actually compounded further that because Cambridgeshire is a rural county, it's more expensive to run the buses because you're likely to be running them with lower passenger loads over greater distances, which makes things which makes things really difficult. There's a balance to be struck though, between how much local subsidy you can bring in on certain routes and the national subsidy, but it's like when the difference is so big,
Hmm.
when it's getting on for two orders of magnitude, um it's it is just unfair, and you see that I think in the sort of buses that we have at the moment, although there's work underway to improve them.
Yes, I think also what is really interesting to me is just speaking to residents and often, and myself as well, before I was in local politics, I had no idea about like the various ways that transport is funding and how unequal it is in the UK. Because you hear, and rightfully so, you hear on the doorstep those comments of like, well, but I went on holiday in this area of the UK or the other, or I went to London, and like, why can they have like better public transport and we have like no buses to my village, or like we have like no working bus route in here or the other area. And this is really interesting how in some countries you have a more centralized way to fund things like public transport, as opposed to the UK with the different layers of local authorities, where, for example, the combined authority of course gets this funding from central government, which is one of the lowest per head in the amongst the transport authorities. But then you also have other things on top. And I'll bring in here the mayoral preset, because I had some conversations on social media recently from people who are quite unhappy that the council tax bills are increasing. And one of the things they noticed was, of course, the increase in the mayoral preset. And I try to say to everyone, so it doesn't mean that it's like a reassuring comment, but that increase in the mayoral preset is to plug in some of the gaps in the bus routes, especially some rural bus routes that were cut. Whether you agree or not that your tax money should fund public transport, I think there's like a debate we can have another time on this live stream. Maybe bring some, maybe when we discuss buses with Stagecoach next week, which we'll announce soon. But I think that's really interesting in terms of like what the money is ring fenced for. Stephen.
Yeah, but so that is quite controversial, and it's quite difficult because there was at Huntingdonshire District Council this week. There were the Conservatives were talking about pointing out all the joint administration, saying urban councillors and rural councillors there's a difference. But I'm a rural councillor because most of my tax is villages as well. Most of them have like either one bus a week or no bus services as well. And so we're talking about that our bus subsidy per head is £5, and Portsmouth's getting over £200. Nick's bus precept is £36 on a band D, so that doesn't even compare to per head, does it? Because that's per family, which you can at least divide that by 2. So compared to the amount, it's quite unpopular, because if you live in a village where you don't have a bus service, and you look at your council tax bill and it says there's a 200% rise in the mayoral precept, yeah, that's a bit galling for some people. But compared to what lots of other places are getting from central government, it's next to nothing. And it's just an elastoplast, isn't it, on already failing bus services as well.
Right. I'm just to go
do, but it's but it's a very small amount of money compared to what other authorities are getting from central government.
I mean, last time we were on, I mentioned I'd taken a bus in, I'd be taking a bus in Somerset, where interestingly there's a sort of consistent set of branding and so on. Their subsidy is 5 times what we're getting in Cambridgeshire, £25.15, and that's another sort of relatively large rural county, and it does become hard to explain why why there is such a huge disparity in the funding.
I think we need to try and understand why it is, because I don't really understand it. It's not just buses, because I'm involved at county council where we're involved with education, and so the pupil premium per head in Cambridgeshire is one of the lowest in the country. I'm also on the police and crime panel, where we talk about the police funding per head is lowest for Cambridgeshire. So we need to try and understand, I think, maybe for next week or the week after.
It's the same.
Why are we at the bottom of all these calculations? Why do we always come out bottom?
Yeah. Sorry, cut across. And it's the same for education, isn't it? Education is
Yeah, it's the same for many other areas. I just wanted to bring in another statistic from this report from Campaign for Better Transport. So they have like a full report. I encourage everyone to read, but one of the figures is around the bus cuts. So they looked at the cuts in buses in the first year of the pandemic, which of course really impacted bus services as well as other factors. And if you look, it's per region of England. So if you look at the east of England, where we are, the cuts are, so it's down, the services are down 30%. So it's a 30% cut. And then it really, it's the highest amongst all the regions. of the UK in terms of cuts during the pandemic, which of course I kind of set a precedent and influenced how the bus recovery worked or not, didn't work very well after that, which I think it's really interesting how you look at some, because someone can say like, well, the mayor has this right to raise or not raise the preset. And I got into this discussion with someone saying, well, but this particular one conservative combined authority mayor chose not to raise any preset. So, but I think we have to think about this in context to look if you have an example of a mayor that doesn't raise this particular type of preset, like how does the funding look like in their region as well, because obviously the amount of money you get per head from central government influences your budget. So I think it's a bit kind of making it a bit political, saying, well, but so and so doesn't raise it or raise it less than in our region, if our region is probably one of the most underfunded in terms of public transport, according to this research at least. So it's just an interesting thought to see it in the context of wider funding.
And Nick's precept is ring fenced, isn't it, for bus expenditure as
Yes.
well? I think I'm not sure if he's said this as an ambition, but it's basically first steps, and we could talk to Darren a bit about this next week, towards moving towards the same sort of franchising model, or a franchising model, as Andy Burnham is trying to do quite popularly in Manchester as well. But obviously Cambridge, being 70%, Cambridgeshire being 70% rural, is a very different kettle of fish for that.
Yep.
Yes, but then there is also the argument, I think it's not only because I totally understand people who are, if I was living somewhere where there are no buses, let's say I live in a village with no bus connections or just one bus in the morning and none return, it is very difficult to see, unless I use the buses to, I don't know, go into Cambridge or travel around other parts of the country to see like how, why does my tax money contribute to services I don't use. But then if you apply the same argument, like, look, I pay, significant income tax and towards service that currently I'm lucky not to use. Like, I'm lucky enough not to need a lot of NHS services. I'm lucky enough not to need those other services. So I think it is really interesting how, like, I was speaking to some people who thought, well, I will never need, those buses. And then they couldn't drive anymore for like a health reason, for example. And they had to realize, well, now I actually don't have any of those services to use. So I think there is an argument to be made in terms of the cost of living. And that's why it's really good that Cambridgeshire District Council did the 100% council tax exemption for the people who are on the lowest incomes in terms of not affording to pay council tax. But I think there is a point where, for example, myself, yes, I am in Huntingdon, my council tax increased. I have the merit preset as well. I'm one of the example of people who actually can afford to pay those £3 extra. I think it's £2 something a month in my case for the buses, even if personally I might not use those rural routes because I use the buses that haven't been cut. So it is like an interesting debate. I can whilst I understand the kind of argument, on the other hand, I'm thinking like, well, it has to be funded by somewhere. And if someone has an idea, that's, let's discuss this. But at the moment, I think it's very challenging to know what the better idea is.
I mean, I think that if I can pick up on that as company, because the thing is, you've got to remember, it's. I mean, on the cost of living and the council tax, there are so many different precepting bodies. So you've got, here you've got towns or parishes, district, county, mayor, fire. There's a social care, and so each different council can say, oh, we're only doing this much, but it all adds up, and that does really hurt people.
Especially in Huntingdon as well. If you live in Huntingdon, it's a bit. So that's one of the things that annoyed me, is that you look at your council tax bill, and like, although CCC and HTC did max rises, I mean that's 3.2 for district council, 3% for Cambridgeshire County Council, which plus 2% for social care. But actually, you look at that bottom line of the bill, and everybody's bill's gone up by 5.6% because we've got a new bigger precept on there, and that's quite difficult to justify. And if you live in Huntingdon, it's even higher because Huntingdon put their town council up, precept up by a lot more as well. With regard to buses, though, like it's you find yourself without a car, but if you're a young person living in a rural village, and you're not old enough to drive, or you haven't passed your test, or you can't afford a car, it's a massive obstacle, isn't it? Because it's an obstacle to education and an obstacle to employment as well. So in terms of kind of rural poverty, and deprivation. It's a massive, massive thing. And it's all right when you're old enough and you can afford a car. You don't drive, do you, David? Not very much anyway. Well, and neither do you, Alex. Once you're in that little bubble of like, I can afford a car, it's not so bad. But if you don't and you can't do that, then it's really, really difficult. Or if you can't drive because of illness or incapacity, it's completely isolating and damages your economic and social chances.
Absolutely. I mean, and there is also an issue that there are bus routes there that are impossible to use for getting to work.
Yeah.
The one, and I know I've banged on about this before, but it's one that really is a real bugbear. The 904, which is Peterborough to Huntingdon, and there is a bus stop outside Ermine Street Business Park. Ermine Street Business Park, lots of jobs there, except no buses stop there between 8 and 10 and 4 and 6.
That's true. I use that one to get to New Shire Hall, and I take this. I think it's the 7:10 a.m. or 7:15. Even when I start, we start our meetings at 10:30 to be able to. So when I don't have access to a car, like I just basically go 2 hours before my meeting starts and just sit in New Shire Hall and do my emails.
That's a question for Darren next week, though, isn't it? Because you think that it would be a no-brainer to put bus services on when people need to use them the most. But we'll find out from Darren, and we'll ask Darren that question. Darren Rowe from Stagecoach next week, because there's probably complicated reasons why that doesn't happen, but we'll find out from him, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing just to comment on this, and then we can do more bus questions when Darren, we can ask directly of Stagecoach next Friday at 7 a.m. So if you're watching and have any questions about specific bus routes or like in general challenges with the bus system and the public transport system, on next Friday at 7:30 a.m. we'll actually have someone from Stagecoach answering the question, discussing with us. But on this council tax, what is really interesting, and I'll just bring in like I guess a philosophical perspective, is of course like we raise it most. I think over 90% of upper tier authorities like county councils raised council tax by the maximum possible. And of course, there were some authorities in the UK that raised it more. And this is obviously linked to many factors, including the over a decade of underfunding of local government and, the economic situation nationally and the impact of COVID, the war in Ukraine and other impacts, but mainly because the grants that are from central government in our area don't catch up with the demand. So first of all, the demand, the increase in population, and other factors as well. But I find it interesting how, for instance, basically what it is, an increase in local tax to fund some bus routes that have been cut, especially in areas that are rural areas, is attracts like less support, like overall I would say, than for example an increase in social care, because I think a lot of people, I think most people understand like, well, we need to support people who are using social care, and I'm very happy for my tax money to go towards supporting people who are in social care, and we need to have that service. Whereas I think with public transport it's a bit like, well, if I don't use it, why should I pay for it, kind of thing. So I think if you think about our different taxes that go towards the NHS, funding the NHS, I think it's very difficult to find someone who's like, well, yeah, we shouldn't pay for the NHS because we all value our NHS. We want it to be free at the point of use. We want us to have access to healthcare when we need it. And I think it's very difficult to kind of object against paying towards that. Whereas with public transport, it's a bit more like, well, if I don't use it, why should I support it? I'm not sure if you agree with that, but it's something that
I'm going to have a look during the week and look at this list of the cities and towns with the biggest bus subsidies, because I suspect if we look at them, there'll be places like Brighton and Portsmouth, who we talked about, which have well-established, well-used bus services that haven't been allowed to decline. I think the problem in Cambridgeshire is through so many administrations, and certainly the previous, when the Conservatives were the Transportation Administration and Steve Count was the leader, they made some massive cuts to bus subsidies, and that's what happens. It's death by 1,000 cuts, isn't it? And then you get to the bottom, you've got a service which isn't connected, doesn't serve people, isn't sustainable, and people have stopped using because they've got no confidence in it. And that's the hard bit. So you can imagine why successful bus services get a subsidy, whereas Cambridgeshire with its ratty-tatty bits of bus services doesn't. But because it would require lots more funding and subsidy to fix the problem. That's I guess that is the key problem. No, I don't know.
And can I just jump in on that? Just two things really quickly. One is that it ends up saving money by investing in public transport, because you know, I mean, and that's on people's own wallets, that they're not having to get the taxi to the hospitals, but also there are, you know, there are real health benefits, for instance, to being able to get around, or economic benefits to being able to get to a job easily, and so on. The other one is I'm gonna, I think, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before. There's a really good report that came out from the New Local by John Denham and Jessica Studdert about place-based budgets, and that might be one to talk about another time. But having a sort of single pot of money for an area, because you always get, you know, lots of different bits of, you know, funding pots. But yes,
and the size of the areas matters as well, because you know Cambridgeshire is a big and diverse regions, and kind of what works in the Fens doesn't necessarily work in Cambridge City or in Huntingdonshire as well. So that would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I'll take some comments from. I see some comments coming in. Please do keep them coming in. I see a question around the 20-mile-an-hour zone in Huntington, which is one of our topics on the list. But before I go on to this topic, I wanted to ask you both about, you know, we discussed about buses and of course the mayoral preset. It's very interesting seeing the article in the local news this week about Anthony Brown saying that a new light rail system is just the ticket to solve the city's transport problem. So Anthony Brown in favor of this new light rail system. Of course, it's a topic we have discussed, I think, before on this live stream. Like I have read quite a bit about it. I think again this links to the idea of like who is going to pay for it, right? Because if you think about a bus, you know, the kind of bus improvement and like a kind of a bus plan for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that costs millions. And someone put it very well, like one of my colleagues, Anna Smith, who's standing for Police and Crime Commissioner, like she said when we were discussing this in a group of councillors, saying, well, you know, a bus system costs millions, but a light rail system costs billions. And the question is, again, how it would be funded. But regardless of the funding argument, what do you think about, this latest, well, I guess latest Anthony Brown article?
I don't disagree with him that light rail for Cambridgeshire would be fantastic, and perhaps, you know, better than just enhancing bus services, but it won't work on its own. And I very much doubt that light railway will serve Abbottsley, Wearsley, Kimbolton, you know, Hunterdon, St Neots. All those places are still going to need bus subsidy. So it's a solution for Cambridge and perhaps Greater Cambridgeshire and South Cambs. But over this side of the county, you know, if it arrives here at all, and the CBT proposals he's talking about don't include, I don't think, any stops in Huntingdonshire at all. Maybe in St Ives along the busway, I don't know. But so our residents, won't be included in that at all. And so yes, to get around, I mean, a city the size of Cambridge should be able to afford, on paper, or you know, you think, be able to afford to have a decent transportation network, and light rail, I think, would absolutely be the best way of doing it. But it's not the only solution, and I think Anthony Brown needs to remember that he's not a South Cambs MP anymore, and he's standing to be a St Neots and Mid Cambs MP, and so he needs to be thinking about serving the whole of the county, and I don't think he does, because I don't think he knows the area.
I mean, since you made a political comment, Stephen, I'll bring in a political comment as well. I also think light rail is good. I mean, like if there was, like, you know, a lot of funding for public transport, like definitely, like you need the bus system to work alongside the light rail system for sure, as you said, because some of the smaller villages like have to connect in some way to transport hubs that could be the light rail stop, so you can still have buses going from some of the villages towards places like, let's say, Huntingdon, St Ives, Ramsey in our area, or other places that could become transport hubs. What I didn't like about the article is, well, saying, well, you know, he has been talking about this for a long while, as have others. I mean, like, he didn't invent this, obviously. There is, like, you know, there are groups of the Cambridge Connect who have been promoting this to politicians cross-party for a long time. But what I particularly thought is very disingenuous in the article is Anthony Brown saying, well, this won't be possible while our mayor and our current councils who control the GCP have their blinkers on. Because again, this is like, if you're going to support this, And obviously, like if he becomes MP, I hope he will like put pressure on the government actually investing in light rail in the region.
Which government?
In
Because as an MP now, he doesn't put any pressure on his government. He votes in favour of all of his government motions. He never votes against his government, and so that's very unlikely to happen. Yeah, he might be an opposition member, yeah, which is more likely if he gets elected here, but he won't have any opportunity to do that either way, I don't think.
Yes, I think in a way, I mean, the idea, I'm not, disagreeing with this. It's just, I mean, it is a political article in the sense saying, well, he says it's up for the rest of us to stick for our plans for Cambridge Connect. He has been in the party that is in government currently. So, my question is, what, what has been done on this whilst,
So,
the
so,
party
so
is in power, but that's just me.
the first Cambridgeshire mayor, yeah, James Palmer, yeah, had an opportunity, and he spanked loads of money trying to build or researching a pie in sky CAM metro system, which was a bit like light rail, but was autonomous. And I guess it's fine to have these kind of big visions, but it was never going to be deliverable. It required lots of tunneling under Cambridge, yeah, and they spent loads of money doing that, and basically wasted the money doing it. And so when Nick Johnson was elected, he took one look at it, realised how much money it was leaching, realised that it was never going to be possible, and canned the whole thing. And that's the problem, isn't it? Is we don't have the stability in local government structures. And I think maybe we're going to come up to that in a minute, actually, when we talk about the next bit, to deliver these things, because if the flip-flopping administrations, flip-flopping mayors don't have the long term, they only see to the next election. You can't, if it's going to take 10, 15, 20 years to deliver things, it's outside of our political cycle. And so that's a big part of the issue. So on paper, it's a good idea, but who's going to deliver it? It certainly won't be the Conservatives, I don't think, at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think with a lot of those projects that it requires significant central government investment. I think one of the issues is, I mean, first of all, our many different layers of local authority structures in the area, but secondly, the political cycle, because in those big infrastructure projects, and it's not only like about, for example, implementing a light rail system, or perhaps, one of the, and we go on to Cambridge 2040 next, but this kind of like type of very large scale project, it is very difficult to deliver anything like this, or like any kind of massive infrastructure improvement within this political cycle, when then everyone is claiming they had those ideas and they did better than the other lot on this, when the reality is like no one really did much, because it changed all the time, because plans were made and then they failed, or like plans were made and then like someone else got in and the plans were scrapped, and so on and so forth. And yeah, it's just very difficult, I think, in our how our electoral system works, to actually have
and the fragmented nature of Cambridgeshire politics as well, with so many different authorities involved. I think there's 4 or 5 different transportation authorities across Greater Cambridgeshire, which includes Peterborough as well, which makes the whole thing, really, really difficult, especially with the political kind of gradients across the county, with the east being under one part of political control and the west being under a kind of more progressive political control. It's just difficult because everything turns into political football all of the time, and it's not very progressive. So I think that's a good segue, isn't it? Let's get maybe.
I was going to say, jump in. I think so that I can see that some light rail. I think we're basically talking about trams for Cambridge. I can see that working in some way. Yeah, I can see the thing. There's a few. There's, as well as all the other problems, is one of the issues we've got is the planning system in the UK, and just generally delivering large infrastructure projects is difficult, and I think that would need sorting out. I think there's also questions about who would operate it, but also there is an issue that light rail is less flexible. There are real benefits to it, and you're carrying more passengers and so on. You can run it from electric and so on. There is the advantage to buses that you can change the routes. You can just decide where the buses are going to go. So I mean, I can see, but I mean, they were talking about, I think, from Camborne, at these, it's like, for moving around Cambridge, okay, I see the logic. We do already have the busway, and I think whatever the rights and wrongs of making that decision, we've got busway track down there, and I just wonder if we want another technology on top of that. I don't know.
But and look at the political carnage that trying to implement new busways causes as well. And again, trying to maintain the existing busways. And we'll hear from Darren at the moment. One of the big stories this week is that the Cambridge busway is about to reopen, isn't it? After massive safety enhancements. But Darren will talk very specifically about the amount that's cost bus companies and how much it's devastated their services. And trying to propose and build a new busway from Camborne to Cambridge. One of the alternative suggestions is we put that on the road along through Coton and by the cemetery, and those things are really difficult to do. People don't want new infrastructure passing their houses, especially in rural areas, and we've demonstrated so far that we're not very good at doing those things. And so, yeah, I think that we should probably segue onto the next part. Apart from, we should probably comment that people like this is John Morris. I'm going to put it on the show. We've got people watching in their pajamas this morning. So Daniel Laycock and John Morris are watching in their pajamas, which is good news because it's better than the alternative than them not watching in their pajamas, I think.
Well, I have to say, we have 263 live viewers at the moment. So the viewership is really increasing. And I actually we had quite a lot more last week, but I didn't expect so many people to be
not on Good Friday.
This time on Good Friday watching our coffee buses and politics.
In their pajamas.
Hopefully next week, when we actually have Stagecoach on and you can ask all your bus questions, there'll be even more of you, because then we can actually go into detail into all those bus challenges. I'm going to bring in the next topic, which is, and I know David has already commented on this on social media yesterday. I'll bring this comment up. So maybe starting with what actually happened, David, with the 20-mile-an-hour zones in Huntingdon. Could you tell maybe if people are not really aware of what happened? Of course, the county council did have the press release yesterday with the kind of outcome of this.
Yeah. So this is 20-mile-an-hour zone for Huntingdon. So this has been being discussed for about 9 months, I think, or maybe even longer, to have some form of 20-mile-an-hour zone in Huntingdon. So Cambridgeshire County Council has funding from one of the national government pots for various things. One of the things that can go on is improving active travel and making roads safer. The county council asked the Huntingdon Town Council to make some suggestions about where it could be put in. Town Council made some suggestions on the 3 particular locations. That went back to County Council, came out with a proposal for 20 miles an hour across the basic all of Huntingdon, not the through road. So Hertford Road would still be 30 or 40, then 30, and so on. And then it would be the sort of final things that are going in are basically for south and west Huntingdon. So there'll be some sort of 20-mile going in, and it will see how it goes, and then look possibly extending it to the rest of Huntingdon. So if it's okay, Alex, I mean, just to say, I don't think it's going to surprise anyone that I'm generally in favour of 20 miles an hour. They make roads safer. If you're a car travelling at 30 has 2.25 times you're an engineer, Stephen, 2.25 times the energy of a car travelling at 20.
Yeah, half mv squared, so it goes up at velocity.
So just that, but it's also about just making things nicer for pedestrians, and also helping sort of active travel, making things better for cycling and so on,
and making the road safer as well. Because this week at Huntingdonshire District Council, I met the family of Mike Goff, who was a cyclist who was killed in Cambridge, cycling activist who was killed in Huntingdon a week and a bit ago. And that was a very difficult conversation to have. Now, I'm not sure if that's related to car speed or not, but there are too many deaths on our roads to do with car speed, and so that's another consideration.
Absolutely. If I can just pick up on the question there, it looks like 20 mile an hour zone for Councillor Sandon and Councillor Wilson's wards, but 30 miles an hour in Councillor King's ward. So Jonas King's is Huntingdon North and Hertford. So basically, what's the road safety logic? It's not. So there's two bits to that. One is there is a particular stretch of 40 mile an hour, 50/40, which is on Hertford Road, by the roundabout, by the BP roundabout, where you'd have sort of 20 mile an hour zones going on to 40 zones and so on. The logic though is also that you need public support for it, and so it's based on sort of, I think, public feedback and feedback from the elected representatives, that it's start it in one area, see what people think of it, see if it works in the particularities of Huntingdon, and then possibly extend it in the future.
How involved was Councillor King in that decision? Has he been speaking up or in favour of? Do you
I don't know.
Councillor? You don't know. Okay.
Yeah, I would just say as well, like in terms of like consultation, and I can bring in this comment and question around consultation processes. I think it's quite usual, like in terms of like county council processes, to test something first, especially when there's really mixed feedback. And I had this experience, for instance, if you look at Cambridge City and residence parking schemes in more central areas of Cambridge, it's quite usual, like, you do like one zone before, like, rather than just saying like the whole city is residence parking, because there's genuine mixed feedback. And sometimes it's like really good to test somewhere first, and like there might be reasons why it doesn't work. Of course, with the 20-mile-an-hour schemes, it is like a safety consideration. Someone mentioned in the comments net zero, so like I do agree with all of that. But I think in terms of like actually having residents on supporting like a certain proposal, like you need this engagement, because if you just say as a county council or whatever authority, we're going to do this in the whole town without having this consultation engagement, it is very difficult to then enforce something. Because if you're really, yeah, I guess, strongly disagreeing with something, like, then enforcement becomes much more challenging if you don't have the public support
Yeah.
for it. So as I understand, it's really frustrating when some of the schemes take a long time to consult on. In some cases, actually having very careful consultation makes the decisions easier to implement in many ways, and therefore like better for residents. I'm not sure what you think, David, about how the consultation process went on this one, because I haven't been, as not being on calls, haven't been involved in the actual consultation.
So I mean, I was so the town council usually put in, let's try it in 3 areas. I was a bit frustrated that the county council then seemed to sort of ignore that, but then they did row back and still go for a basic trial area and then expand it later. So I think there is fair, the county council did listen. Now I'm sure that there'll be people howling and saying, "Oh no, we're still getting it." It's like, I mean, there is a thing that actually quite a lot of people do like this. I mean, there's been, I mean, I can just think in my patch where there's sort of been, where there's been road traffic accidents. There's one not long ago where a school child was hit by a car and was quite badly injured and so on. So, sorry, what I'm trying to get at is, and I'm no angel on this either. People, I think, are a little bit dogmatic on this, and people, people say, "Oh, we have to have it," and anything other than having it everywhere is wrong. Usually, people, saying, "Oh no, this is terrible. This is a terrible idea." It's like, well, there has to be a bit of willingness to sort of give and take and listen to the other side a little bit. The other thing is, and I don't want to overplay this, there are unfortunately conspiracy theories going around as well, and I think part of the reason, I think, about things like ULEZ and people being locked in their council areas or whatever, there's a load of nonsense, like the thing from Oxford and so on. I think that's given that context, it is particularly important on these things to go through a consultation process, and also to go sort of slow and steady, so that as far as possible you do get public buy-in for what's going on. I mean, I had a slight frustration in that there's things like, people saying a car traveling at 30, 1% doesn't use much more energy than a car going at 20. It's like, well, it does. I mean, this is sort of fairly sort of basic GCSE physics.
Yeah.
But sorry, I sound like a what's it there? But there's that. But there's it seems like it's on the. It's like all things being equal, a car traveling at 30 will be more efficient in terms of fuel per distance traveled than a car traveling consistently at 20, generally for an internal combustion engine. But that's not generally how you're driving. It's quite, in a town, if you just think about driving around Huntingdon, even if you're going around the ring road, that's not how you're driving. You're accelerating and braking all the time, and it's accelerating that uses a lot of energy, and that's causing the emissions.
On my patch, yeah. So I've got like eight villages and 8 village parish and town councils on my patch as well. And really, I've let them make their own minds up as well. It's not for me to say; it's for people who live in the areas to decide themselves. And the villages that want to do it, I have supported, and areas of I've supported as well. And the ones that don't want to do it, I support it as well. It's not for me to say. I mean, as a general principle, I'd like to see traffic speeds decrease, I think, for safety purposes, or only when it's necessary. But yeah, it's not really for me to intervene in these things as well. So it's I can understand there's differences in the way that different communities have reacted to this in Huntingdon as well. So I think
can I jump in on one other thing there? It's also about just making the roads safer and nicer and so on. So does it for me, does it make a huge amount of difference crossing the road if the car's doing 30 instead of 20? I'm not in too bad shape, no, realistically not so much. If you're pushing a pram and you've got to sort of lean out between cars, or you're using a mobility or scooter or something, actually that slowing things down does actually make the roads safer and nicer to use. Similarly for cycling, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, just to say on this as well, because I always comment on, I guess, the psychology of different political policy decisions, is that on the one hand, because I read a lot of comments against 20-mile-an-hour zones in general, like in different areas, not only in Huntingdon, in Cambridge, in other areas as well, because some of the Cambridge roads and residential areas are 20 as well. And of course, the news as well that the 20-mile-an-hour zone in Ely. So I spent quite a bit of time reading some of the opposition to this, as well as obviously being on the doorstep and so on. And I think it's again one of those things where, when I'm driving around, for instance, when I have the rented car and don't have to take the bus, it is very easy for you because I think I drive quite safely, right? So when I'm driving at 30, I think I'm driving I'm well rested, I'm driving safe enough, I can see everything, I'm quite attentive around me. Why do I have to slow down? In the 20 feels really slow, when you go from a 30 to 20 zone, and you think obviously nothing will happen until it does. And I know, and I kind of do relate to the argument that if something was to happen, it's so much worse from a road safety perspective if you're at 30 than 20. But I think there is this temptation when you see a lot of comments when people saying, well, there's no need to be so slow because the road is wide enough, or I'm driving quite safely, or I'm careful. Of course I would see, if you think yourself as a driver, of course I would see the pedestrian, of course I would see the cyclist, until you're in the situation where you don't, and that speed difference makes a massive difference, especially in residential areas. So I think that's something that I really got to think about personally when I was at one of the 20s Plenty events or conferences a couple of years ago, and seeing some of the research on this, because before I thought well, probably like many other people, I thought why do we need this? If you're if everyone just drove in a safe way, that will be fine. But then you realize, just reading all the research and obviously looking at some of the terrible accidents that have happened, and you might want to think again about some of the arguments for some areas having 20, I would say.
It's just because people aren't used to it and it feels like an inconvenience. I watched some videos this week of in the 1960s when they first introduced the drink driving regulations or laws, and you had people rationally arguing that I'm all right, I can have 5 pints and drive my car, and it's not, I think that kind of legislation was over the top. And so every time you have one of these changes, it takes a while for it to settle in, and people will accept it in the end, I think.
I think that's why you need to have the consultation and the, like, have some local support on this, because otherwise I think you're, many ways you're making it worse if the county council or the government like implement something that is, yeah, doesn't have the discussion beforehand. Because I
Yeah.
think, even in my case, I do know, like, I kind of needed to have the discussion and that kind of information, and seeing some of the presentations, reading some of the arguments for and against before I thought, like, yes, this is a good idea in some areas, rather than just being like no against it just because I relate to my personal view. And I think, like, well, but I'm fine with this. Why should I be inconvenienced because other people are, driving in a dangerous way, for example, and so on and so forth.
This is a good question as well, though. Is so no road safety logic in these half-baked decisions, and actually one of the difficult things that to try and justify these things is there's not an enormous amount of good data. I think there is some data, and I think there's increasingly data that
Mhm.
demonstrates the amount of lives that will be saved by doing these things. But of course, there's not that many of them either. And as we implement more of them, I'd hope we're going to get better data to demonstrate. It's an A/B test, isn't it? This is how many people died on our roads before we implemented the 20-mile-an-hour zone. This is how many people died afterwards. And so the part of the problem is that there's not much data to enable us to make those decisions as well at the moment. So they're basically based on engineering rationale and common sense as much as hard data about safety. It's the same thing actually with trying to justify helmets for cyclists as well. Is the data can be conflicting sometimes as well, and sometimes you have to make decisions based on basic physics, as David tried to do earlier.
That's so true. I'll just comment on this. Even on very, very small changes like the local highways improvement applications we make as councillors, one of the questions is, like, what is the data around this, around like safety? And you open the accident data. And for example, like I know in my area, there's a roundabout that's really dangerous because there was a lot of near misses, like especially like, some accidents involving bikes, like not very bad ones, but still, damaging and like injuries and so on. But either they're not reported, or they're just not on the system, or they didn't result in something that had led to some reporting. And when you open the map and you think, okay, they're like only like, I don't know, there's obviously like one accident is one too many, but there's not enough data to justify, like, to apply for something. Because then you say, oh, okay, but the nearby roundabout has more data on this, and therefore prioritize this area. So often in some, even to implement something, like for me as a county councillor, like I applied for some double yellows on like a corner like of a side road that went onto Newmarket Road in Cambridge. And even that like took a lot of research to kind of justify it, because there was no accident. I said, like, well, it's obviously like, common sense to me is when I turn onto the big road and I don't see anything because there's car parked on both corners. Obviously for me that's like a road safety concern. Yeah, like I can see this like just using the road myself, but there's no accident data and you can't really prove that it's a safety concern. So it really goes in a circle. It's
So
yeah.
here's some evidence. Every time you see a speed camera on a road, it's a pretty good indication that somebody has been seriously hurt there or died, because they don't put them in otherwise as well. And so there's a clear correlation there between at least the measures we take to improve the safety in roads is by reducing speeds always. And so as a general principle, I think reducing speeds in dangerous areas or areas where danger is likely to occur and people are at risk is I think probably a good idea. But yeah, hopefully we'll get some proper data, because I believe in data-based
Yeah.
scientific.
There is an issue that, I mean, I agree with you on the data, but there are some things where it's going to take a while to get the data, and how you get the data is going to be really difficult.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if you're talking about just making the roads safer and nicer to use and to encourage active travel, that's quite difficult to measure.
Yeah.
And you can see, okay, we're generally having, for instance, more people traveling by bicycle, but it's like, is that, because we've implemented all of this zone, is it the zone as a whole, is it a particular road? It's quite difficult.
There is this whole, it's cropped up a lot recently, a different measure of GDP, which is the number of females that cycle to school as well, which comes into this as well, which we should probably talk about sometime as well.
Speaking about topics we have to leave for next time, there were some questions around before this live stream started around Cambridge 2040, and I really think that is like an hour in itself, because you can't really go into some of the the
Shall we?
argument on that.
I think we should talk about that. We do a special one on that where we do
Yes,
our research.
on Michael
It's
Gove's
very important.
plans.
And it's because it's really, really huge. Again, it doesn't include Huntingdonshire, where we all live and we all serve. Well, not you yet, Alex, but you might do in the future.
I live here.
You live here, but you're not elected here yet.
Yeah.
But hopefully you will be. But I think it has massive impact on our local communities here.
Yeah.
And again, we're outside of it, and they're talking about building a development corporation there as well, which
Mm.
might or might not be a good idea. You know, we've talked about lots of the struggles of delivering big projects and big infrastructure projects with the current setup as well. So there's definitely a big discussion to be had on that, but it's probably going to take us an hour, isn't it? So after we do the Darren Rowe one next week, Stagecoach one next week, perhaps
Yeah.
we should do a special on Cambridge 2040 because there's lots of information that we need to talk about.
Definitely. So next Friday, so I see there are over 300 people now watching. Thanks everyone for the comments. Sorry we didn't get through all the comments. I'll take one last comment before we close the live today. But next Friday, 7:30 a.m., we'll be discussing with Stagecoach all about buses, bus challenges, and opportunities. And the week after, we might organize something again, maybe with a special guest around Cambridge 2040, with someone who actually knows a lot more about the detail of this. Otherwise, I'll have to read like thousands of pages myself. I have to say it's so challenging, isn't it? Because it's mainly like our city council colleagues and obviously South Camps colleagues that have been involved, because I haven't been in any kind of briefing or meeting on that. Obviously, like I know what I know from the media and from the paperwork that we can all read, but I haven't been in like actual meetings in the same way I am on county issues. So
my online Twitter friend Claire King has been bashing me and saying, well, not bashing me, she's been suggesting quite not calmly that people in Huntingdonshire and Huntingdonshire politicians need to start reacting to this now, and she's completely right. And we had a big full council meeting this week and it didn't really come up as well, and it's not really a big topic of discussion in cabinet or in the administration. It's something we need to change, and so absolutely we need to start putting the focus on that, because it might be a good thing, might be a bad thing, but like when the GCP was formed, Huntingdonshire wasn't around the table, and if you don't make decisions now and campaign now, you'll be left out.
I would say like a small anecdote from the doorstep. I was canvassing in Cambridge City yesterday. I canvassed everywhere across the eastern region. I was on the doorstep and someone was really concerned about Cambridge 2040. But then what they did say, because I was like, okay, what are you particularly concerned about, and just trying to have a discussion on it. And what this particular person, I'm not saying it's representative of everyone, just one view, but what he said was like, I don't understand why we have to expand Cambridge so much instead of putting all those houses and jobs somewhere else. And I was like, where would you put them? And he said like, I don't know, like in Huntington or somewhere, like we should just like move them out. And I thought that's really interesting. This is a resident in Cambridge thinking basically what he was saying when we discussed a bit more is like that those jobs and development should be like more equally distributed, I guess, like across the county, rather than being kind of concentrated into expanding Cambridge. So maybe that's something we can discuss next time, because I thought it was like the view of one resident, which I've never encountered before in this form. So it was really interesting conversation. Final question before we stop the live stream today, and it's a difficult choice because there's so many questions I would like to take today, but I know we are already running over time. With 5 weeks away, what are your early predictions for the local and police and crime commissioner elections? Quick round.
So I know all three of the candidates. I serve on the police and crime panel, so I've worked quite closely with Daryl Prescott, who's the current incumbent, who's a Conservative and a former copper, and I like him very much. And I think particularly early in his regime, he did a really good job. Police and crime commissioner is a difficult role. Somebody's just I stood for it, and I really wouldn't want to do it. Is the truth. So the three candidates are Daryl Prescott for the Conservatives, Anna Smith, who is Deputy Mayor at the moment of Cambridgeshire and former leader of Cambridge City Council for Labour, and Edna Murphy, who's a county council colleague for me, in a Liberal Democrat county council colleague in Cambridgeshire County Council. So those are the three. I like Daryl quite a lot, and I think he's done quite a good job. But recently, being involved in those meetings, there's been occasions where they've had to answer questions to members of the public, or a member of the public who's got a particular reputation for asking difficult questions. But the contempt with which that questioner was treated, not by Daryl himself, but by his executive office, really, really disturbed me as well. And subsequently, on the Police and Crime Commission, there have been moves to have complaints reported through his executive office and not through the the independent police complaints procedure. And that really worries me. And so I certainly, you're asking for prediction, not who you're supporting. So I think Daryl, the electoral system means that Daryl will probably win, but I wouldn't put bets on any Conservatives winning any elections around here. We had a Yaxley by-election a couple of weeks ago in which a core Conservative vote completely collapsed. It won't be a high turnout because people don't care about the Police and Crime Commission. So I think Daryl will probably win, but I think there's a chance that Anna might nick it for Labour.
I was just looking at the result last time, but of course the electoral
Changed the
system.
system. Yeah, they changed the system because they didn't like getting beaten. So it's now first past the post, isn't it? Which completely favours the Conservatives in a largely rural area. You know, if it was on the old system, I would have put money on Anna winning, but I don't.
Yeah, same. So in 2021, so like it was this preferential voting system. So like at the end, after the second round, Daryl Preston got 52.7%, and Labour's Nikki Massey got 47.2%. So it was really close. It was like a 5 point difference, but that was under the old system. So now with first past the post, basically you can't give your second preference vote. So if you voted, let's say, Lib Dem as your first preference, you can't say I vote my second preference as Labour, which is what kind of happened a lot last time. So a lot of the Lib Dem votes went to
and you might not want to comment on this, but my view of that election was that Labour put most of their resources behind campaigning for Nick Johnson, and the Police and Crime Commission elections wasn't a big. I mean, it was on the same ticket, I guess, but I don't think Nikki had the sort of support that Nick had. And therefore, she could have closed that gap. It was much closer than people expected after the mayoral race as well. But I don't think it was a top priority for Labour at the time. But so we'll see how much effort they put behind Anna. It's a year without any other elections, and so I'm sure she's going to get full support. And I've seen lots of canvassing going on social media.
Well, there are elections in Cambridge City, because the question asked about the local and Police and Crime Commission. So there are other district level or city level elections coming up. Obviously, we don't have council elections in Huntingdonshire. So if you live in Huntingdon,
there is one by-election. So on my patch, the district council, my very good friend, Conservative councillor Richard West, who served for 17 years and served for 3 years alongside me, and who is one of my best friends in politics and who I adore, stood down. He retired a couple of weeks ago because he's 80 and he's caring for his mum who's 103. So there's going to be a by-election in his patch, and he chose his date of retirement. So the by-election will be on the same date as the Police and Crime.
Okay, so on the 2nd of May.
Yeah, 2nd of May, so we could get a decent turnout. So there'll be one by-election in, and that's going to be hotly fought as well, because of course St Neots in Mid Cambs is looking like at the moment, a very tight marginal seat, three-way marginal, maybe even four-way marginal.
David, do you have any predictions on the Police and Crime Commissioner elections?
I don't know enough about the race to say a huge amount. I suspect turnout will be low. Like there's elections in the city of Cambridge, because I think there's elections there every year, or pretty much every year.
Yeah, they're in
Peterborough as well.
But it's like outside it. So going back to 2012, I've just pulled up the figures. Turnout was 15.9%. The 2016-2021, I think that was matching with other elections, and so turnout was in the 30s. I suspect turnout will be disappointingly low. I'm afraid I don't know enough.
What's the benefits of what are you predicting? Are you going to predict, Alex, before we move on to this? But what are you predicting? You're going to say Labour win, aren't you?
Well, I hope it will be, but I think it's actually a very difficult one to predict, partly because of the turnout and partly because how having other elections in some areas affects the turnout. So in Cambridge City, for example, because you have the local elections in thirds, then you go and vote for your local councillor. So there's a lot of canvassing going on. There's a lot of activity from like all the parties there, and there you also get the Police and Crime Commissioner vote. So like it's likely more people will vote. The Cambridge vote being like quite different, like overall more left or like kind of non-Tory leaning. Like although there was we have now one Conservative councillor in Cambridge City, so that kind of like higher turnout in Cambridge because of the elections happening could have an impact. But I think it will be like closer than people would expect. I think most people will say, well, it will be less close than the 2021 because you have first past the post now. But I think it can be still quite close because of the collapse in the conservative vote across the country, really, and in general.
Can I just say, I'm not. This isn't about the people who have fulfilled the role or are seeking to fulfill the role, but I don't think the position should exist.
That's the question now. What are the benefits of PCC? So I serve on the Police and Crime Panel. I've been on it for 3 years, which is the panel which scrutinises the Police and Crime Commissioner. And my view is there are no benefits. It's an unnecessary level of political administration, and that the chief constable should be in charge of policing in the region. And because there's a PCC, we get to scrutinise the PCC, who then scrutinises the chief constable. So it's like it's a level of abstraction we don't need. I'd much prefer to have the chief constable come in front of elected representatives and councillors and have to justify himself, because actually the actual amount of influence that the PCC has on the policing in the area, I think, is minimal. And so personally, I think the whole thing's a waste of time. But having said that, as long as the role's in place, we should elect somebody who's decent to do it. So I think it's worth voting in these elections. But if I was in control, if I was in charge of the country, it was something I would look to scrap immediately. It's only a matter of time.
Maybe you'll be one day, Stephen. I actually think it's a fair point. I think with both of those, well, Police and Crime Commissioner and the mayoral authorities as well, I do think at some point, I do realize that's not a priority. Like if a new government comes in 2024, this year, or January 25, if they leave the election until so late, when a new government comes in, I do realize the local government reorganization is not the top of the priority when you have so many things going so badly in this country and it's fixing. But I think at some point there needs to be like a review of all those different roles about what they actually do, because a lot of when the mayoral authorities were created and the Police and Crime Commissioner roles, it was, in my view, and that's my personal view, a way to kind of have more conservative control, because you're mixing urban areas like city of Cambridge and Peterborough, that of course I know it's it's quite mixed politically there, but you're mixing in a lot of parts of the UK urban areas with rural areas, and therefore you can have quite, as at least at the time it was thought, you can have quite a safe seat for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, quite a safe seat for the mayoral authority, until of course surprises like Nick Johnson winning in 21 happened, and other surprises across other parts of the country. And yeah, it didn't really work out as it was intended, but it was one of the ways, again, the boundary changes, you can argue that it's boundary changes are favoring one party over others in many cases. But yeah, I guess we can do another live stream on boundary changes.
Should we talk about next week a bit and just promote that as well? So there's been lots of negativity, hasn't there, in general, about Stagecoach and commercial bus operators. If you mention Stagecoach on social media, people have lots of opinion about Stagecoach making profits. And we just talked about the Nick Johnson's bus precept as well. And I think three of us have all met with Darren Rowe from Stagecoach separately, and we've taken lots of that rage and those questions to Stagecoach, and he's always answered them really eloquently. So definitely tune in next week. Bring all the negativity you want, and we'll get Darren to answer some of these questions, because he's a bus enthusiast, man, and he's a really, really compelling speaker. And so maybe he won't change your mind on Stagecoach and buses, but it's definitely a conversation that's worth tuning in for next week at 7:30 a.m.
Yeah, 7:30 a.m. next Friday. Thank you, everyone who had over 350 live viewers at one point on this show today. So it's clear we have to professionalize a bit. Now I feel the pressure now, because we literally just wake up. I don't know about you two, but I wake up 10 minutes before this. No. What are we going to chat about this today? And
we didn't know, did we? The most of it come from the questions. I spend all night research. No, I don't. We get up 5 minutes. We don't even talk about it the night before these days. We need to professionalize it a bit as well. How was your experiences on TV last week? I saw some of it. You looked fantastic and you sounded fantastic. How was that experience? Nerve-wracking?
I would say, in my view, it was decent enough given the amount of sleep I had before. working on leaflets and canvassing and all that thing. So I think it was good enough. But next time I go on TV, I will sleep more than like 3 hours the night before, to say the least.
I was very proud of you, and I was very proud of the way you spoke at County Council last week as well. Because when I was chair of County Council, you used to fit 10-minute speeches into a 5-minute slot, yeah, and you just out. And last week at County Council, you spoke brilliantly, and you could almost feel the emotion in the chamber when you were speaking. So you've come a long way as well. So well done for slowing down.
Yes, I do try very hard, mine, and that's something I was discussing actually with some of my Eastern European friends, and how actually that is true. If you look at some languages, like your first language, and how many words you usually say per minute. So it's not only that; it's the fact there are other like kind of factors as well. But I think that really, really influences because like I come from like the northeastern part of Romania, where we also speak faster than people in the south of Romania as well. So in addition to having a language where you genuinely speak faster as your first language, I'm also from like a part of Romania where we speak faster. And then it depends where you grew up as well, because I spoke in Romania, speaking a way where I cut words. So I can't do this in English, but I cut words like in the middle, like it's my kind of natural way. And then in council, I have to try very hard to say every single word without cutting the words. So
That's all true, but I think part of it is also you have so much to say in such a short time scale, and so the stuff you say is always really interesting. And even if you say less now in your speeches, I think they have a bigger impact. So well done.
Thank you. I see there's a debate going on 20-mile-an-hour zones still in the comments. Sorry, we don't have time to do more, questions and answers.
But we can join in after in the comments as well. So
yeah. Can I just ask people who are having the discussion in comments, be nice. Remember the person you're talking to. Remember the human, please.
That's true as well. And also here, like David Landicole has eloquently answered his question about pollution levels. Before David came back onto this, we were getting like 30, 40 people. As soon as David comes back, we get 350. So obviously,
I think it might be something to do with suddenly having a parliamentary candidate on the stream as well.
David's local knowledge is really, really valid. I think on this 20-mile-an-hour zone, like I think we could do a whole hour, because there's so many. I mean, like even for me, there's so much to still learn. Like I can't claim I'm an expert about every single topic or study on, like, let's say what David was saying about pollution levels, or like how accidents are more or less likely to happen. And I think that's one. I'll just end with this comment. I think that's one of the things that is really difficult, for people being in politics, because you're expected to have an answer to every single thing. And on some things, I'm quite happy to say I actually do not know, and I will like go back and read some stuff and get back to you. And I think that should be like an acceptable thing to say, because otherwise we're all just expressing our personal views, or I speak just from my personal experience without kind of like understanding different arguments. So on a topic that I just genuinely don't know as much as I should about, I would rather just say, I don't know. I'll go read some stuff. I'll go and chat to different people.
It's a trick, though, isn't it? It's a trap as well. Not, I fall into that all the time, especially at council meetings, where at district council, where you get asked questions without notice. It's easy to try and say what you think rather than what you know as well, and so that can be as well.
Yeah, exactly. And on some topics we can have, and I have very strongly held personal views on some topics, which might not be the view that I think would be best, because ultimately as local or national politicians, we want to make the area we live in or represent better. So I might have like a particular personal view on something, right? But I don't think that implementing just my own opinion is the best thing for residents. And sometimes I might, after I listen and read stuff and listen to different parts of the debate, I can use my judgment to say, actually, I think based on all the evidence and the different opinions, what is the right decision for this particular area is this, rather than just me and my, how this decision impacts my personal life or inconveniences me or doesn't. So
and it's quite, or at least I found that quite difficult, because I'm an opinionated so-and-so. It's quite, and the stuff I'm dealing with is much lower level than the stuff you guys are dealing with on county or district and county, but it's quite difficult sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, I think, for people both in local and national politics to detach their personal opinion, especially on things that are related to a certain identity, right? So like, I was speaking about like how I feel about driving in 20-mile-an-hour zones, and how, the first thing that comes to your mind is like, oh, this is so slow, like, why should I drive so slowly, like I'm driving safely, of course. Then I have to like detach myself from that thought and think, how would other people feel, like how the road is made safer for people who are cycling or walking, how I reduce the likelihood of fatal accidents, by lowering my speed and so on.
And
And it's a process to go through to think about the different views on this, I think.
And if you crash into me at 20 miles an hour instead of 30 miles an hour, you'll do a lot less damage to your car.
Yeah. It's almost like what Alex said. We should have like a weekly thing where we just talk nonsense about things that just come into our head for an hour, and then 356 people tune in.
Yes, exactly. I think it's really rare, I think, in politics, because I was saying this to a friend, and he was like, "What are you going on live things that can be they are recorded, like everyone can clip this. You're welcome to, without preparing a script and everything." And I was like, "Yeah, I think we need more people who are comfortable actually discussing topics, even if I might not have the answers to everything. Right? We don't have the answers to everything, but at least, like, speaking about those issues is important. We might not agree, like even amongst ourselves on things, but it is important to have this conversation rather than just preparing every single speech at full council. That is great.
Good practice hustings as well, Alex, as well. That will be for sure.
The videos I generally do on a Sunday evening, I mean, I'm thinking about things come up during the week. I'm thinking of topics I want to put in there, but those are my notes for those are maybe, I usually use Notepad, and it's just like, these are the topics I want, it's why on them I do tend to go quite a lot, which I know is a bit annoying, and it is trying to sort of, the idea behind that is it's easy, so I actually get them out reasonably regularly, but sometimes it is good just to go through and give your take without being over polished.
Let me just before just talking about that, because we need to finish. But I did a little video this week about the Old Falcon and St Neots, which has been 15 years derelict. And what I did is I took the council papers, and I read them out. I made a little TikTok video of it, and that's had like 16,000 views this week. And like, if
I have seen your TikTok.
Yeah, well, not only on TikTok, across all platforms. It's mainly on Facebook for me. It's where I've got my following. But I did put it on TikTok. You notice you didn't share and like it, Alex.
I'm just watching.
So I put it you just put it away, but that's not the point. The point is that it got 16,000 views because I took council papers, I read them out and put some photographs and some subtitles over the top of it, and then suddenly people engaged with it. Whereas, this week, so we've got 357 people watching us now. District Council this week, there was, loads of us sat in a meeting for 3 hours, talked about stuff with 5 people watching on YouTube, 1 person watching in the galleries, and it just goes to show you have to use different ways of engaging with people as well. So I appreciate your videos, David. I appreciate your TikToks about buses, Alex, as well. And so it's just different ways of communicating with people as well, because people have disengaged with politics so much. I think it's good that my ambition was we will get more people watching council meetings eventually, but there's reasons why that doesn't happen, because lots of them are quite boring as well.
Yeah, but I also think it's about the structure as well, because council meetings, especially full council, has such a rigid structure. Like, obviously you have the minutes, like you have the kind of action log, then you got your like motions, and you got like the questions and everything. It's just not how people speak in real life, right? And I think especially for those of us who don't come from like kind of like very formal, like a formalized political backgrounds. I mean, for me, it's like a very strange environment to be in, or to watch like Parliament TV, like, and how how the whole conversation is structured is not how I speak to like my neighbors, it's not how I speak to my family, it's not how I speak to just door knocking around. Like, I have a different approach.
Would the honourable neighbour like me to put out their green bin this week?
You didn't have to bring green bins into it. We were doing so nice.
Can do I was trying to find Stephen's TikTok, because I also did a recent TikTok yesterday when Councillor Neil Shaler and I walked from Huntington to Ramsey. I chose a very easy walk just because Neil was joining. I can do like a 12-hour walk. If anyone wants to take up the challenge from the 356 people viewing to do any kind of walk in the constituency, like, I'm very up for that. So I did a 3 hour and 40 minutes walk from Huntington to Ramsey, and met some of our council colleagues in Ramsey yesterday. So it was quite a nice morning.
I'll come with you, but I'm still scarred from our walk from Alconbury to Huntingdon in the middle of the summer when we
That's
couldn't
only
get on the
1
bus.
hour
And
and 20.
we had to stop, but we had to stop at a pub for
Because it's
supplies
30
to refill.
degrees, like it was very hot.
It was really hard. It was hard, but I like walking as well. And I will come and join you. So
You know what? Next one, because we did this walk for cancer research, Neil and I did Huntington to Ramsey one. Next time, the walk that is really good to do is actually from where you are, Stephen. So from St. Neots through Huntington, through St. Ives as well, and then it can be like 5 hours.
Don't know if I've mentioned, Alex, but a couple of years ago I did walk the whole length of the through St. Neots, St. Huntingdon, God, Manchester, and St. Ives. So I am aware.
So you're already prepared then for the 5-hour walk. Okay, that's great to hear. That is great to hear. Okay, I'll just put this. We really need to end now. But I'll put this comment just for fun. No comments, but just for fun.
I think that you should. There are some. If you go through Alex's really old TikToks, there are some TikToks where Alex has a beard. Yeah, you've got a filter on with a beard, and actually, I think you are more credible with a beard. So don't rule it out during your general election campaign. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I'm definitely ruling that out in the TikTok filter. But okay, one to consider maybe after the elections. All right, then. Well, thank you everyone for watching, guys. If people are still watching in high numbers, but we need to end here. We did an hour and a half of live with zero preparation, so have a lovely Easter weekend, and we'll see you on next Friday at 7:30 a.m. when we'll be discussing issues on buses with Stagecoach. So a good weekend and bank holiday. Well, Friday and Monday.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Bye bye.